Well, hello and welcome, everybody. I'm really excited to be here with you all. As you can probably tell, I am not in Basement Studio today. I am here in the beautiful hotel. Can everybody hear me okay, by the way? I'm not seeing the microphone there. I'm bouncing up the levels there. Anyway, hope you all are doing well today. I'm really excited to be here. We are at the beginning of planning season for the Colorado Trail hike. For those of you planning a through hike, maybe you're going to do some section hiking here. I see a couple of people talking about lashing. For those of you who don't know, lashing stands for long ass section hiking, which is one of my favorite acronyms in all of the hiking world. And thank you, Doc. This is one of my favorite times of year because planning is often it is often the best part of the trip, or at least it's one of those really terrific parts of the trip that we can all kind of dive into and have a really great time with there. So Scott, did you catch my definition there of lashing? It's long ass section hiking. Sorry for the profanity. We'll try to keep this clean for the children. So let's start talking with just some basic principles here. The very first thing that I want to share with all of you, especially if you're new to Colorado Trail community, or if you're not even a part of that community, but you're just thinking about the trail and kind of looking ahead at the ways where you can get involved or maybe start planning some hikes. I have to tell you, this guy right here, the Colorado Trail data book, is absolutely essential. So I think this is a really underutilized and underappreciated resource for those of you out there. And I think or at least what I notice is when I'm on the Facebook group, I notice a lot of folks will ask questions that could be answered by this book right here. So for those of you who know anything about me, I'm a college professor by day, and the number of times I tell people it's on the syllabus is probably about the same as the number of times I tell people the data book is really your best friend. Everything you need to know is right here, or at least the beginning parts of that are right here. So let's take a look. I want to just share with you before we dive into some of the questions. I've started seeing a few of those come in already. What I want to share with you first is the sort of what you will get in the data book that makes it unique, and particularly what about the data book, what the data book does that, say, Far Out or the Gut Hook app doesn't necessarily have, and the reasons I think this is a really essential sort of resource, especially at $15. I think this is really great. So this is from the Colorado Trail Foundation website. And as we look at this here, these are sort of samples of the inside of the pages. And a couple of things that are really important about this. The first is, if you can kind of see right here, you're going to see water sources and campsites. Of course, the campsites and water sources you can get on Gut Hook or Far Out. But if you look here, some of the water is sort of intermittent. And what that means is it will really depend on the snowpack, which we're going to have a question about snowpack. It is heavier this year, which is great news for water supply. Maybe not so great news for folks who are trying to start earlier than others. But the snowpack looks pretty high this year so far, especially in sort of later sections of the trail. I'll show you a little bit about some of the resources that are available there as well. But when you look at this here, the data book is great for showing you places where water is already and how you can sort of plan ahead. And one of the things we're going to talk about a lot of times throughout the course of tonight is going to be really the sort of stretches where you'll have unique challenges, like a 32-mile stretch without a water source, for example, that you really need the data book to be able to identify, this is my last water source for about 30 miles or so. So there's also a couple of other things here. We've got the resupply towns. This is really nicely done here. It will tell you how far away from the trail these towns are, where the different resources are, or at least what they have to offer to different hikers and how to get to these different places. So I think this is absolutely an essential for folks planning, even if you end up not taking it on the trip or you end up with sort of the Kindle version. Details you'll have to tell me. I'm not a Kindle user like you, but I believe you're probably getting at the idea that it is available on Kindle. If you could tell me, that would be great. I would just love you forever for that one. The other piece of this too is take a look around the Colorado Trail Foundation's website, specifically because this is without a doubt the best supported long trail in America by way of all the resources and planning that are available to you from the Colorado Trail Foundation specifically. And I want you to look here that when you go to the website here on Traveling the CT here, they have all of these different resources that are available to you on the side here, specifically for many of you. I think Scott Valor here asked a question about snowpack, and he's right that it is heavier and it will affect starting times for a lot of people. But when you scroll down here, you will have these links that will tell you the snow depth at certain places along the trail that will really help you figure out whether or not it's realistic for you to be able to start earlier, say, than July 1st, which is typically the best starting point for a lot of people, or after July 1st. What I have seen is people sort of decide that they're going to go sooner than that. And that's not typically a great idea. Of course, hike your own hike, right? But typically, what I found is that people who start too early with the snowpack end up actually finishing about the same time as people who start later, because you end up sort of post holing and really slowing up. If you want a great example of this, actually check out Girl Plus Dog Adventures video of segment 7, as she went over the 10-mile range and ended up sort of post holing with a friend, and it really slowed them up quite a bit. But it's remarkably difficult. So don't underestimate. It's not sort of like walking across snow in your front yard, that it can be really, really difficult for you. And in some places it can be dangerous, which is also really important for this discussion here, because one of the things I sort of come back to frequently is the idea that we need to be good stewards of the trail and its resources. So if you take off at a point where the snowpack is heavy and you end up getting into trouble, then you will be using Forest Service resources to rescue you, which is also not a great use of those resources. So basically, that's my long way of saying, make sure that you start at an appropriate time and give yourself lots of time to get through those tougher spots. The other piece here is, of course, make sure you take a look at all of these different resources to kind of plan out when you can start. Generally speaking, July 1st is probably the safest, especially if you're planning on taking off work and you're heading out, or if you need to buy plane tickets, that sort of thing as well. So let me star a couple of questions here, make sure that we're not missing those. I do want to show you here this one with segment 6 over Georgia Pass. I went ahead and opened it up for you all. And if you notice here, right now we're looking at about 26 inches of snow, which is plenty of snow to start post holing. This is also just a really good sort of measure, Georgia Pass, specifically for when you can start, because Georgia Pass is the first time you actually get up over tree line, which is about 70 something miles in, I think 72, 73 miles in. That's when you go up over Georgia Pass. So this is a really good resource to kind of gauge when you can start. Once you get over tree line, that's when you start getting into some of that sketchier territory as well. Don't let that scare you, though. Just know that a little bit of planning goes a long way. And especially if you're planning the adventure of a lifetime, it's really important that you set realistic goals for when you start. Be sure you're not ending up sort of like Rose here, who's post holing in her front yard. That's probably not the way that we want to go. That sounds crummy, Rose. I'm sorry to hear that. Now I want to start here. We had a question before we started from Bri B, talking about here the prescription for the medicine for elevation or altitude sickness, right? And this one, I can't actually speak to it. I can say it probably doesn't hurt and that a doctor will be able to help you with this. The good news, though, with the Colorado Trail, as I sort of mentioned a moment ago with Georgia Pass, is that it's not until maybe 4 or 5 days in that you actually get up above tree line. So for a lot of people, if you come in the day before you start, or maybe a couple of days before, you can actually kind of acclimate pretty nicely before you end up starting to get into those higher elevations. That said, I've talked to a few people who have gotten this prescription and they've loved it. They thought it was great. That's all anecdotal. I can't speak for that specifically, but I can say that if your doctor thinks it might be okay or might be helpful, I say go for it. It can't hurt. And again, for many people who are planning this trip, this is a big deal. Right? This is, you're taking off a month of work. You might be, if you're like me and you're sort of in the middle of your career, this might be your one big chance at a really great adventure like this. So don't risk it, right? Just go for it and make sure that you have all those resources that are available, be it prescriptions or planning the right time to start, those kind of things. So great question there, Bri. I appreciate you asking that one. Let's take a look here to Scott Valor asked a great question. Talked about snowpack and affecting those start times. It is higher than normal. Typically speaking, July 1st is still pretty good, but again, it doesn't hurt to start later. And the reason I also mentioned starting a little bit later, sort of twofold. One is that July 1st typically sees a huge bubble. you get to see a ton of people who are starting right there on July 1st. So it's great if you're a solo hiker, for example, and you're a little nervous about starting the hike. You can start July 1st and probably start hitching up with people that you'll hike the whole trail with by the end of Waterton Canyon. I know that sounds insane to a lot of people. That's 6 miles in, and I'm telling you, you might find somebody you'll hike 500 miles with from there. But I've seen it every single time I've walked through Waterton that by the time you get to the end of Waterton, there are tramilies starting to form, those sort of trail families. And so certainly starting on July 1st makes a lot of sense, or starting on a sort of Saturday in July also helps. If you're hiking solo and want to meet up with people you can hike with, that's a great idea. But really, if you want to make sure that snowpack is safe, start in the middle of July, and that'll make sure that you're plenty safe. The other advantage of starting a little bit later is that you're going to miss what they call monsoon season, or you'll sort of be a little bit later in the game, meaning the rainy season, typically speaking, is that July stretch where you're going to run into a lot of rain. Folks last year had a whole week of rain. It was really unfortunate. A lot of people were really discouraged early in that stretch, but starting a little bit later, typically speaking, the rain will start to dissipate as well. But basically, I think it's a great question there, Scott. I think planning a little bit of safe space will be good, but ultimately, keep in mind that you won't really start seeing snowpack until 70 miles in. So if you start on the 1st, most people aren't going to make it there until Georgia Pass, until maybe 4 or 5 days in, generally speaking, maybe a little bit sooner, depending on how strong a hiker you are. But that's a great question there. Also worth knowing that on the Facebook group, typically sometime in the next month or so, they'll start doing a snowpack Tuesday, I believe it is, where on the Facebook group, they'll post people who have hiked and will tell you how clear the trail is and how far you can make it before the snowpack really stops forward progress. So if you're following on the Facebook group, that's a great resource for you to follow that Snowpack Tuesday report. Might not start coming out until April, but all the same, go ahead and follow the Facebook Through Hiking group for 2023. Keep an eye on that because it will absolutely help you with that as well. Let's talk to Dave with Off Grid. I'm going to get to hike with him. I'm going to get to hike with him in Joshua Tree. So here, talking about beginners who want a section hike but have never hiked in Colorado before. It's a great question, Dave. I think really some of the things that you might consider if you're thinking about heading out there is acclimate a little bit early, fly into Durango, and then hike, get a shuttle to maybe Mullis Pass, which is 75 miles from the end, and take off from there, because that San Juan area will absolutely hook you, and you'll be stuck from there. So we'll get out there sometime soon. Don't you worry at all. Let's talk here. We've got North Hunter. Would crampons be an unnecessary piece of gear if you start July 1st? I think so. I've started July 1st a number of different times on big section hikes and even some others, and I've never seen a need for crampons. That said, one of the things that you might take are micro spikes, and then plan on shipping them home when you get to Breckenridge, which is 104 miles in. So typically by that point, when you're 100 miles in, you're going to be fine for that. I don't think crampons will be necessary. Of course, who knows? Maybe we'll hit the apocalypse and snow will really come down in some crazy ways. But the thing about the CT is you start there in Waterton Canyon at about 7,500 feet of elevation, and it's not for a while until you really start getting up into those higher elevations. And even if you see some snowpack, typically it'll be pretty thin. So it'll be thin enough that you might have a little bit of snowpack here and there, but I haven't ever seen it if I start July 1st. And if you're nervous about it, maybe even start July 8th, a week after, and you'll be fine. But I don't think I would carry the weight of crampons. Let me know also in the comments there if you're there, some of the folks who have through hiked this before. So I know Details is in the group there, and maybe a couple of other folks are kind of lingering there. And I think Eric Bumpus was possibly going to be here, maybe Whitney as well. So if any of you all are here, chime in on that. But I've not seen crampons being necessary. That said, I would recommend specifically trekking poles if you're not a trekking pole person already. I think those are really nice addition, specifically if you end up in some places where the snow melt is starting to make the trail muddier. Trekking poles can make a real difference, or in this higher snow year, the trekking poles will be helpful when you're going across creeks and rivers. Generally, there aren't a lot that are going to be sort of sketchier, but it only takes one slip into the water to make things not so super fun as well. So here we've got Veronica is talking a little bit about fires, and if a fire pops up near the trail, being notified. This is actually, it's a really great question, and it's one that is worth thinking about. But it's also one that I wouldn't necessarily be super worried about. And here's the reason: is that on the Colorado Trail, the good news is you will cross a forest road or a regular highway, state highway, US highway. You're going to be following those, or you'll be crossing those every 15 to 20 miles or so. And so it would be very unlikely that you you would still end up hiking into a fire, specifically because what will happen is they'll have people standing there at those trailheads saying it's time to go, we got to get you out of here. But generally speaking, you're going to have plenty of heads up and advance notice, and they will have so many big fire crews there that you're not necessarily going to end up in a pinch. So I think the bigger concern with fires is actually not being able to complete the hike, which I think is possible out there. It's worth knowing here that as you're planning your trip, you, generally speaking, will need to have a stove that turns on and off. So alcohol stoves are a no-go. Campfires are, generally speaking, a no-go. They will ban those most years. I've only seen maybe 1 or 2 years where I've been out there where campfires are allowed, but that's probably for the best. And when you're through hiking the CT, most of the time you get to camp, you're way too tired to even think about a campfire. You're thinking about maybe a little bit of food and then heading out from there. So don't worry too much about those campfires, or the forest fires. But just know that if they do exist or they do happen, then there's a very real likelihood you will have to skip segments of the trail. That's not the end of the world, though. Let's talk here about, we've got Rob here talking about planning camping spots and realistic daily mileage. I love this question for so many reasons, because if you post this question here to the Facebook group, Rob, I'm sure you're going to get 1,000 different answers that say some variation of it depends. It really does depend on your physical level and sort of your adjustment. Let's start first with that pre-planning camping spots. I think this is, with the exception of maybe segment 1 and segment 2, no planning at all. And the reason I say that is any of that planning that you do will not necessarily hold up, right? You might plan on a great spot. You might even look at one in Far Out or in the data book. And when you get there, it's all full. Or when you get there, you have way more energy and it's too early in the day. You want to keep moving, or maybe you get too tired, or you get stopped by a thunderstorm. So pre-planning too far out is not necessarily a great idea. Know that you will find a camping spot. You're never going to end up sort of hiking into the dark because there's not a camping spot. You're generally going to find that there is plenty camping spots to be found where you can still practice leave no trace, that sort of thing. Realistic daily mileage is an interesting question for a number of reasons. We can get into a lot of the thick of it, but one of the nice things about the CT is that it is really nicely built. Now, it's hard. It's hard. But most people find that they can make bigger miles as the trip progresses, right? So if you have a certain number of miles you have to average per day, don't worry if you're not hitting those miles the first 150 miles. That's okay. It's normal. Generally speaking, most people end up cranking out big miles as the trail progresses. Specifically, segments 18 and 19 make up a lot of miles. And then when you get into some of those segments sort of over Snow Mesa, you can make up some quick miles, etc. So you can definitely make up some of those bigger miles. For me, I think most people can probably average somewhere between 15 and 20 a day over the course of the trail. You might start at a lower mileage. You might end up with a bigger mileage. I'm not sure. I know that I've been able to do about 200. I've been able to do quite a few miles that I didn't think that I would be able to do. Now, I do want to follow up here real quick, Rob. You say campsites being full. Now, there aren't real designated campsites. That's a great question. Now, let's go back over here, though. There aren't designated campsites, but when I say that there might be campsites here, when you look at the data book, they will have sites that are developed, or at least leave no trace principles, are a lot easier because they've already been established. Now, where this gets to be full, when I say that they might be full here, is that there are certain places where there are only a handful of good camping spots. So by the time you actually get there, there aren't really good camping spots. So, for example, in segment one, when you get to the end of segment one at the South Platte River, there are a handful of good camping spots, meaning nice and flat, and they fill up very, very quickly. And by the time most people get there, after about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, you can camp there, but you're going to be on a slope. It's just not a great situation there. So the spots might just be too packed at that point. And that happens a lot earlier in the trip where you're not going to find some great spots. But if you do end up in that situation, again, you can probably hike a couple miles more, which is for most people about 40 minutes more to an hour more, and find a good spot. So what I like to do personally is I hike until a certain time. So say I'll hike till 6 o'clock at night, and then say I'm going to stop at the next good campsite from there. And that has worked out really, really well for me. And absolutely, Rob, you're more than welcome. I know that can be a really tricky question there as well. Let's talk here about snowpack in the San Juan's making a difference for a start date for those starting in Durango. That's absolutely true, particularly because as you go through the trail, your average elevation will get a little bit higher. I do want to show you here, Jerry. This is Jerry from Tangent Trails. If you all don't know him, check out his channel. He's taking off very, very soon on the Lone Star hiking trail and does just wonderful videos. I want you to check those out. I want to give you a shot, though, of that section, sort of segment 27, which is right after you leave Durango. I think it's maybe 20 miles outside, is the Indian Trail Ridge. And this is what we're up against when we get out that far. And so basically what you're dealing with there is that area is so far above tree line. There's not really much that you can do if it's snowed under, that it can be really sort of treacherous there. So I think the best move there would be to check out the Colorado Trail website and start working your way backwards to see when would be a good time to start. You can also track down historic start dates for those different windows. That's also a great idea, especially if you're like Jerry and you like starting in that Durango area. I think that's a really good, generally speaking, a really good idea as well. Let's talk here. I think I saw a question here from Sonia. Let me see what we've got. I'm coming in from Indiana and know the temps will be high in the 90s when you start. What kind of daytime temps can you expect after the first week or so? Sonia, you'll have to let me know what time of year you're starting. If you're starting in July, though, I think what's interesting here is the temperatures can be in the sort of 80s, often in that range. What's great about this question, no matter when you're starting, is that when the sun comes out, it just adds 20 pounds to your pack. It just weighs on your shoulders quite a bit. So if you're not a morning person, start working on being a morning person. And what I mean by that is the earlier you start, the better off you are for making those miles. That also applies to Rob's question earlier about how many miles can you average. For me personally, if I wake up at 5 in the morning and I start hiking by 6, I can make more miles than somebody hikes the same number of hours as me who starts at 8. So basically, I can take a 2-hour break in the middle of the day, and I can hike farther than that person on average, because those hours before the sun comes up make a huge difference. So don't underestimate the sun. It really does weigh down on you. The temps will fluctuate, obviously, but typically speaking, I would expect sort of mid 80s during the day, and depending on how high you stay, those sort of things, you're going to look at anywhere from often 30s to 50s at night. It's a great question. Keep me posted on what time of year you're starting. But that said, also feel free to look up, I would look up sort of like Leadville average annual temperature. And the reason I say Leadville is because it's so high in elevation that will give you those sort of higher limits for what the cold will be. And then maybe check out some others like Durango for the lower elevation. So kind of get a range of what you're looking at there, because they will help you. So basically Leadville and Durango, you're kind of looking at the high point, low point in some respect. That will give you some sort of barometer for what you're looking at temperature wise. Dave here hitting a home run. Does your snack intake increase with mileage on trail? This one is great. Yeah, kind of. For those of you who don't know, one of the best things I've ever done is switch from having lunch to having lots of snacks. So I have a lunch. I have instead of a lunch, I take sort of 8 snacks throughout the course of the day. And again, one of my personal quirks, I'm turning into such a quirky old man, is that I have a snack for about every hour. And that gives me a little bit of a break every hour. And I have snacks constantly. It's absolutely part of where my trail name came from there with Snack Box. So this is absolutely the case. Rob here talking about layering, bringing shorts to hike in, but feel like it'll get cold in camp. I love this question. Rob. You're hitting some home runs tonight. I would take the shorts. I would take the shorts and maybe a pair of long underwear to wear under it at camp. But I've taken shorts and no pants. And the reason it works, twofold. It might not work for everybody. So again, take this with a grain of salt. I love it because when I'm hiking, even in the morning when it's cold, as long as I'm moving, my legs don't get cold. I don't get cold. I sweat. I'm pretty easily warmed up. So the shorts work great for that. And then, so the shorts work great for that. And then at night, by the time it gets dark, I'm already in my sleeping bag. So it works really nicely. And then the Phoenix here points out front pouches in your pack are absolutely for those snacks. But basically here, the idea is that the shorts work fine for me and I don't typically need those pants. You might take rain pants to wear if it gets really cold and you're kind of sitting around camp. But to just sort of second there, Ruth, snacking every hour is a good way to make sure you get enough calories. And this is, Ruth, I'm so glad you mentioned this. What Ruth is pointing out here also is counterintuitive, and it's not going to feel that way for those of you who are feeling like you're getting sick from climbing or elevation. Here's the deal. When you start the trip, you're going to lose your appetite. Most people find they lose their appetite, but you have to keep eating. You have to keep eating, you have to keep drinking water, and you're not going to want to. So making sure that you have something you can sort of force to keep yourself fed will make a huge difference, because if you stop eating, then you're definitely going to start tanking pretty quickly, and stop drinking water as well. Both of those are going to be, they're going to be really key. And so basically make sure that you're getting all those different snacks. And here, details here, hike the Colorado Trail in 2021. Was that when you hiked it? I heard you had some pretty important things happen that year, but she wore pants the whole entire trail, didn't regret it. It worked out nicely for her. And she's also, like me, tends to get warm really easily. So it really is dependent on how your kind of composition is made. But it is worth knowing that, generally speaking, when you wake up in the morning, you'll be getting out of camp and moving really quickly. And then also when you stop at night, most of the time you'll be asleep well before it's cold enough to matter. So you'll have your sleeping bag kind of working in your favor there as well. Let me take a scroll here and see if we have any. Sonia says start in the first week in November. That's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see how it works out. It sounds great. I think if there's any snow, though, that could be a real challenge. I don't know how it will work. That's going to be really challenging. Just my one recommendation is to make sure that you are prepared for the eventuality that snow or cold might complicate that trip a little bit. So have sort of strategies for what you're going to do, or sort of a backup plan if that happens that way. But I can imagine that November in Colorado would be absolutely gorgeous as well. Here, Dave's got another one here talking about how many nights are exposed mountain sections, and is the wind bad? Are there ways to avoid or mitigate this? Absolutely. So there's only one stretch of the trail where you end up above tree line for a substantial amount of time, meaning that 32-mile stretch that starts, I believe, it ends at Taylor Lake, just after that stretch that I showed you of Indian Trail Ridge. and it starts maybe at Stony Pass or maybe a little bit before that at no, I'm sorry. It starts about 9 miles, 8 miles past Lake City. So 8 miles past Spring Creek Pass all the way to the Elk Creek drainage. You can find that in your data book as well. But basically, you leave Lake City, which is at mile marker 357. You're going to hike in about 7 or 8 miles to the yurt. There's going to be a sort of a set of trees there. And then when you hike through that, you're going to end up eventually hiking up above tree line. And from then on, you were above tree line for 32 miles. There is plenty of wind. I'll show you here a quick clip of that one. This is segment 23, which I believe is just before the Carson Saddle or maybe just after it. But just notice how exposed this area is. And then we're going to talk about this question specifically. So take a look at the exposure here. Also, catch how beautiful it is. Okay, so that's it, right? It's really, really exposed. I call it the Narnia section. A lot of ways to mitigate the exposure. Some will be, most of the sections you can stop in trees. Even in the Collegiate West, you're going to be able to find some spots to kind of tuck away and stop within trees. So you don't really have to worry a whole lot about that. But if you are up on some of those sections, there are sort of small side trails. And even if you go down them often just 100, 200 yards, you'll be kind of between little saddles where the wind won't necessarily knock you about. So this is where that tip I told you earlier, where you hike to a certain time. So hike until 6 o'clock, for example, and then find a good spot, stop at the next good one after that, will be a really good example of a really good way to kind of make sure you have a good spot there. Here we go. Here we go. Thank you, Sonia. August is a great question. I think 90s during the day when you start, particularly the first 100 miles or so, you're probably going to see those 90-degree temperatures, and then at night a little bit lower. But after that, it's going to be stunning. It'll be beautiful, especially if you go Collegiate West, which, if you all don't know, I have a particular affinity for Collegiate West. I think everybody should do it. It's really great there. Scott wearing pants as he tends to burn. That's actually a great point there, Scott. Making sure that you are thinking about double duty. So it's not just about warmth, it can also be about sun protection. That's really great there. And speaking of sun protection, John mentions here an umbrella for sun or rain protection starting in mid-August. Absolutely. I think if you watch in the chat there, I think details from Girl Plus Dog Adventures will mention this as well. But the umbrella works great also, not just for sun protection, especially segment 2. It works great also for hailstorms. So if you do end up in some hail, having the sun umbrella can turn into a shield for some of that hail that tends to fall down sort of a little bit here and there. This is a great question too. Let me take, is it proper to stay in the, to just stay in the yurt? This one, you could stay in the yurt, but you'd need to make reservations. I don't remember who operates this one, but it would be very hard to coordinate your through hike with an available reservation. That said, if you do get to the yurt, if you watch my water special, there is the yurt is kind of in a murky, kind of boggy area, and a lot of people will try to get water out of that. But if you just hike 100 feet into the woods past that boggy area, there's a creek off to the left you can hear that has crystal clear water. So that's my one little pro tip for you there. Doc, thank you for coming tonight. I appreciate you. Have a great night. And let's talk here about the CDT. Collegiate West does follow the CDT, but so does a lot of the entire trail. So the Collegiate West or the CDT will line up with the Colorado Trail about 2 miles past Georgia Pass, maybe even just a mile past Georgia Pass. And then it will follow the Colorado Trail and the Collegiate West, but then it will stay with that until the Elk Creek drainage. So until you get to the Elk Creek drainage, which is, I want to say it might be like mile 403, somewhere in there. So you're talking about maybe about 280, 300 miles of overlap. Collegiate West only makes up about 80 miles of it, but it is absolutely, there's absolutely an overlap there. And it's kind of cool because when you start seeing the CDT hikers, if you were one of those people who starts a little bit earlier, now you will end up seeing these people who are coming through and really crushing big miles. And if you ever want to see somebody who absolutely smashes miles, you need to meet some of these CDT hikers. They're absolutely incredible here. Details here: the yurt wasn't available in 2021. Friends of the Colorado Trail run it, or Friends of Colorado. Did you mean trail there? Details, but. And that one, if you Google yurt, you'll be able to find it. I would say it would be a lot of fun to book this and just do a day trip out there to it, I think, or not a day trip, but an overnight to it would be great. And it's a beautiful hike from the Spring Creek Pass over to it. It's not incredibly difficult necessarily. Here, Rob, this one, oh man, you're going to get me in so much trouble here. Rob asking why this Collegiate West instead of the East, and which has the hot spring. So the hot spring is on the Collegiate East. This is my own personal opinion. Please do not get angry at me for this one if you love the Collegiate East. I've done the East and West both. I've done the East twice. I've done the West 3 times at this point. Even though I've hiked the East twice, the only thing I remember is the snack bar at the Princeton Hot Springs. That the rest of it is very, very difficult. So I think, and these are, again, my own terrible opinions, so take that for what you will. So the Collegiate West starts with Hope Pass, which is what I consider to be the hardest climb in the entire Denver to Durango if you're going Denver to Durango. There's a different one if you're going Durango to Denver that you will go downhill if you're going Denver to Durango. But that said, that's the one hardest climb. But the next 3 hardest climbs are the first 3 climbs in the Collegiate East. So you start with 3 really gnarly climbs. There's also, even though it's lower in elevation, what that means is you do these really gnarly climbs up to the top. And then when you get to the top, you're still in the trees. And then you don't really get the same kind of views. And then you head straight down and you do it again and do it again. Again, though, it's the original route. So I did it in 2020 when I hiked from Denver to Silverton. I did the loop as well. It is an important stretch that I think everybody should do. The Collegiate West, though, I do think they're both equally difficult, which is important because I think a lot of people believe the West to be miles more difficult, which is not the case. I don't believe it's that much more difficult. I think they're about the same when you factor in the payoff. So when you climb Hope Pass, you get to the top, it's stunning. So you get this sort of balance between effort and payoff as well. Now, the East also does have the South Fooses Creek. It does have Mount Princeton Hot Springs. The West, though, has the Cottonwood Pass parking lot. And so about 40 miles into the West, you're going to leave Lake City, or not Lake City, I'm sorry, Twin Lakes. You leave Twin Lakes and you hike the Collegiate East, then the Collegiate West 1 and 2, and then you climb and climb and climb all the way up to Cottonwood Pass, eventually about 40 miles in. Might even be just 30 miles in, somewhere in there. But basically at Cottonwood Pass, you have all of these people from Buena Vista who come up to just see the pass and then drive back to Buena Vista, which makes, for those of you comfortable with hitchhiking, it makes that really pretty easy because you just strike up a conversation with folks. And if they're at that parking lot, they're probably going straight back to the town of Buena Vista as well. I do want to say a quick congratulations here to Huck. Good evening, Huck. Congratulations. Huck just got to a solid 10,000 subscribers. I've been really enjoying his Joshua Tree videos. I am planning to head out there really soon and check that area out. I want to give a couple of, speaking of sort of other YouTubers and shout out specifically Colorado Trail. If you've not checked out Details and Girl Plus Dog Adventures, she has really wonderful videos about the trail itself and has them broken up segment by segment. You can also check out Mad Hippie's Life. They did a beautiful set of videos on the Colorado Trail on their through hike. These are great for getting a sense of what to expect in each section. I think that's a really, I think they're great. And they're also really wonderful advocates for the trail itself. So they've done a lot of work with the CTF so far as I understand. They're terrific. It also brings me here to the another piece of detail that is worth knowing about. And for those of you who are concerned at all about hitchhiking, here Details says I'm biased. That's probably an accurate statement, I would say. Congratulations, Huck, there. And then I'd agree with you there, Dave. So Let me share here what I've got. If you are concerned about hitchhiking, which is understandable, I don't want to assume anybody here really feels super comfortable with it. I will say most people get more comfortable with it when they're on the trail than they are now. A lot of things change. If you just wait till you see what you're willing to eat by the time you get to Salida, I'll say that, right? But here, if you go to the Colorado Trail Foundation website and you click on this one here, the shuttlers list, you can go ahead and do that right away, but also you can do it right before your hike because this gets updated and you basically put in your name, email, and information, and almost immediately it will generate a list to you of the different people who are willing to shuttle or be a trail angel for you. So shuttlers, of course, are people who will likely expect some compensation. So they will tell you how much it will cost to take you from sort of if you take the shuttle from Denver Airport over to Waterton or something of the sort, they'll let you know what that's going to be. Trail Angels will do it for free. What I will say though, and this one is really important, is make sure that we preserve the culture of gratitude and particularly make sure that we are not expecting that if a person's on here, they're going to just drop everything and show up. Just make sure that we're being conscientious of that. I do know a couple of folks who have taken their name off the list because of some bad experience with Colorado trail hikers, which is unfortunate because in my experience, the people that I've met have all been so incredible that I just want us to make sure that we keep this trail really a special place where the culture and the vibe of it is that we are a community and we're trying to stay together. So if you do reach out to people on that and they're not able to help or they are able to help, just be really be your best version of yourself because they are already being their best version of themselves by helping us out here as well. Let me go over here. We've got Tangent Trails hashtag or Jerry there from Tangent Trails talking about Chica and sunsets, having good videos of the CT through hike. Absolutely. I think that's a great recommendation. And I really do think there's so many great videos out there and creators who have really sort of spent some time on the CT that you're going to find plenty of them that are out there. I'll also say that you can feel free to reach out to these different folks and ask them questions. Generally speaking, they are going to be more than willing to help you out with these. They're going to be more than willing to help you out with, all those different ins and outs that you might not know about. And I've had folks, I've never had somebody not answer a question for me. So remember, there are a lot of folks who are not me who have great information. So feel free to reach out to them or reach out to me at Backcountry Champion on Instagram, and I'm happy to answer those as well. Got a newbie question here. That's a great question there, the Phoenix. Here's what I recommend is have some cash ready to offer. And typically speaking, I would take about maybe $100, $50, I don't know, but I would have them in tens. And so I would take those in tens and just offer. And sometimes people will take you up on it without any question. Sometimes they will say, no, 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 it's fine. It's also a good idea to just offer, if you strike up a great conversation with these folks, just offer to buy them lunch or dinner, right? That's a really great way to go. If you're not comfortable carrying cash, you can also take a little bit of, you can take a few gift cards or something of the sort. That's often a good idea. But people sometimes will take that money, sometimes they won't, but make sure you have something to offer. That's always just good form in general. But also if you're nervous about that or you're not sure how much to take, set up a shuttle, right, and see what they're going to charge, and or just ask a shuttle, and then you can kind of gauge what that is. I like to err on the side of being as generous as possible, which for me, being not super wealthy, is not as generous as I'd like to be in my lifetime, but you get the idea here. Here we go. Let me talk about, we've got another question here from John. So here, what do you think about doing the collegiate loop as part of the CT? I love this idea. I think this one is incredible. I think it's a great idea. It's also relatively easy to coordinate a shuttle from Salida back up to Twin Lakes. It might cost you a little bit of money, but you could certainly get down there to Salida and then take the shuttle back around. I think that would be really doable. If you have the time, it will add probably 5 days to your trip, give or take, and you can work it out. I'd recommend it. If you do that though, I would do the east first and then go back and tag the west. Because again, I like save what I consider, I think the collegiate west is probably my favorite 80-mile stretch of the trail. maybe San Juan's, I don't know. But either way, if you can, absolutely crush it. It'd be great. Jody here. This is George is his name, but Jody, it's great to see you here in the chat. Hitchhiked a great deal, and the people picked you up. Never took more than a few minutes to get a ride. That has been my experience as well. I think that the people who you see in Colorado, the culture of outdoorsy folks is just such that generally speaking, you can catch hitches. Again, if you're not comfortable with it, I don't want to encourage you to do so. And I can't speak for your safety. I mean, God forbid something awful happens. But in my experience, I've been more likely to find people who are ready to help me than people who are up to no good. So that's basically all I'll say about that one here. I think there might have been great point here from Daryl. How much you eat on 0 days. This is the risk we all run, right? You get into town, you're all excited, you eat 2-3 lunches, and then the next day you are super lethargic and not feeling great. I think that's a great point there, and really just kind of space things out, because once you get that hiker hunger, you're going to be really feeling that as well. Take a quick scroll here. We might be nearing the end of the questions. If you have any questions that I haven't answered already, go ahead and toss those in the chat. I want to make sure that I get all of your questions as well. I think Dave there might have asked a question about burning my clothes. Where are we? We'll find it. I think Dave, you asked about burning your clothes at the end of the through hike. Absolutely. You got to get rid of them. They're not going to be any good. I have a tradition of throwing away my shoes at the end of the trail. So I finished the John Muir Trail and threw my shoes away. Colorado Trail, threw them away. Before I even left the Junction Creek Trailhead, I think I found the first garbage can that I could. I believe this is Elderberry. That's right. Elderberry, it's great to see you. Elderberry is one of my favorite hikers. We met on the 10-mile range. And so here, great question. This will be available. It will actually be readily available right after we finish. You can start from scratch with it. I hope you're doing well. I hope that we get to cross paths very soon. Elderberry, this one goes out for you here. Let me show you. I separated a clip of the 10-mile range. This is where we met. So for those of you who don't know, this is in segment 7, separating you from Breckenridge and Copper Mountain Resort. You basically hike straight up out of Breckenridge, get on this ridge and run the ridge, and then dip down on the steepest descent, I think, on the entire trail down into Copper Mountain Ski Resort. And this is one of the most, I have goosebumps thinking about it. It's so beautiful. But this is where I met Elderberry last year. So here you go. It's incredible. It's one of my favorite spots. And even before that, there's this really beautiful sort of stonework path right before you get up above tree line. What I will say about that stretch, though, is when you leave Breckenridge, you need to do so early. So this kind of goes along with the point that Daryl made about watching your food on a 0 day. Most people get to Breckenridge or Frisco, and that's at mile 104, and they will take the bus into Breckenridge or Frisco. They'll eat a bunch of food and then get back on the trail. But when you're on a town day, most people kind of end up back at the Gold Hill Trailhead at about 8, 9, 10 in the morning. But by that point, when you get up to tree line, you will often get stuck waiting on a storm. And it's happened to me multiple times. I think 3 times at this point I've had to wait to get over that. In fact, last year I had to race over the ridge there because I was getting pelted with hail, and my big old Dumbo ears kept getting smacked with hail in the back of them as I raced down the ridge to get away from the storm. I want to point out here that Dakota Rose here talks about slack packing section 7. That's that section I just showed you. Now here's what she's talking about, and it's a great idea. It's what I did last year. There is the what's the name of the summit stage? Summit stage will take you from the Gold Hill Trailhead all the way over to Copper Mountain and back. So if you decide, what you can do is actually slack pack it, meaning you can leave your backpack wherever you're staying for the night. So book 2 nights, go into Breckenridge, drop your backpack, take the bus in the morning, climb that peak and ridge without a backpack, hop on the bus, and it'll bring you right back around. And then next morning, take the bus back over to Copper Mountain Resort. It's a great idea specifically because that peak is really prone to catching a lot of those storms as well. Here we've got North Hunter, tips on drying out boots after water crossings or bring Crocs to cross the streams. That's a great question. And here's what I would say is neither. If you take a good pair of shoes, the one thing that I'll say about the shoes, do not buy waterproof shoes, because the thing about waterproof Gore-Tex is that it will keep water from getting in and also keep water from getting out. So don't buy waterproof. Go ahead and buy the full water, whatever you would call it. But the good news about the CT is that if the stream is big enough to really necessitate sort of treacherous walking, they will have a bridge put up most of the time. So in my experience, you don't really need Crocs either. That said, you might bring the Crocs or a pair of flip-flops for camp shoes, because at the end of a long day hiking, you will end up in a good situation where you have a nice comfortable pair of shoes and you can let your shoes dry out. My own personal take also is that I like to take a fresh pair of socks for every day. Now, this is the most bougie thing that I do, but I have a fresh pair of socks for every day because I was able to switch to trail runners when I got trekking poles. So I wear trail runners with low socks. They're just cheap, fruit of the loom, athletic socks. But just by switching into a clean pair of socks every day, I think I only need about 6 pairs, which is a lot. But I prevent blisters. I've not had a blister since I started doing that. And because I switched to trail runners, now the socks take up about the same amount of space as a 3 pairs of big, tall, sort of old school hiker socks, those kind of deals. Here, Dakota Rose, wears trail runners, crosses a creek, feels no need, takes the liner out of the shoes, takes off your socks. There you go. I think that's a great tip right there. There we go. We got Tim Mason here. It's great to see you, Tim. I'm glad you're able to make it tonight. Here, beautiful, but also terrifying in a thunderstorm. I agree with you. When I was there on that section of the 10-mile range a couple of years ago, I was waiting out the storm. You can see this on one of my videos if you're interested. But I sat there with my hiking buddy, and then we saw some CDT hikers come down, and they said when they were on the ridge, their hair was standing on end from the electrical charge that they could feel, which is absolutely the scariest thing. The scariest things. That's a great question. Dave from Off Grid, can you speak to that one there? Again, my personal take is that I don't know that you would necessarily need to worry a whole lot about waterproofing, especially if you as long as you make sure your clothes are dry inside your backpack, you're going to be okay as well. Ruth here mentioning slack packing section 7. I agree with you. That would be really terrific. It's what I did, and it's what I would do again. I think it's just a beautiful section, and the less you can worry about a heavy pack, the more, the more you're going to enjoy the trail. And let's not forget that that's really the goal here, that trying to enjoy as much as you can about the trail that's what it's all about. So if you feel like something isn't working well for you, you can always pivot. What's also good to know about all of these different gear choices that we've kind of started walking through is that when you get to Breckenridge 100 miles in, you can make all sorts of changes. There's an REI in Silverthorne, which is right near Frisco. So you can go buy new gear if something's not working. If something is working and you want to stock up on more, you can do that. So by all means, sort of like the crampons question, try something. If it's working, then great, but also build in a day to send stuff home or to stop by REI to buy stuff that will replace what you're finding works and doesn't work here. Which direction did I slack pack section 7? I went from Copper back to Gold Hill, but I've done the other way a couple of different times. I would recommend going Gold Hill, meaning Breckenridge to Copper, because the climb out of Copper is insanity. It's absolutely bananas. It's so crazy. It's so nuts how steep it is. I had no weight in my backpack. I thought I was going to die, and I'm no athlete, granted, but holy mess. I mean, if you go the other way, you trip, you're going to roll all the way to Copper. But it's a mess here. it's a mess. So here, girl plus dog, I think Details points out here, bringing cheapo flip-flops or camp shoes is a good idea because your feet will be tired and like to air them out and let them breathe. That's also a great tip for making sure that you can prevent those blisters, because if you can let your feet dry out, then it will prevent them from being soft and creating that sort of wet friction that creates those blisters. Speaking of blisters though, here, be sure that you check out Leukotape if you don't have any already. Don't use moleskin, that it will peel right off your feet. It's a product called Leukotape. Let me type it actually in a banner so you can see this. Maybe I should have done this beforehand. What do you all think? If you know anything about me, I think Jerry also already mentioned this here. My two biggest tips here, Leukotape. I might have inverted or switched the E and the U. Here, Leukotape is basically the adhesive backing for Band-Aids on its own, but you can put that Leukotape here. Yeah, you can put that Leukotape on anything and it will stay as long as you want it to. So it will stay and prevent so many of those blisters and other issues. I think that is, it's just such a great thing to have. It's only about $6-7 off of Amazon. Huck vouches for it, so you know that it's good. You know that it's good here. And here, going back to that climb out of copper here, the climb was nuts. That one is absolutely the case. And here, a worry if you take the bus to Copper, you won't know where to find the trail from the bus stop. That one is actually, it's a legitimate concern, but it's pretty easy. There's a footpath that'll take you right there and you can kind of see it actually. So doing a tiny bit of looking early, you'll be fine. You won't have any trouble with it. I don't believe. I think you'll be okay. Rob here asked about using trail runners, grabbing those boots. It is absolutely huge difference. So let me talk, at least in my experience. Again, Rob, here's the thing is take all this with a grain of salt. I'm one dude. I've made a lot of mistakes in my hiking career and I have a lot of hard opinions about things that maybe I should not have so hard opinions about. So I'm gonna have a hard opinion about this. And if I'm wrong, then I hope we could still be friends. Here's what I'll say is that when I did the collegiate loop, it was when I was first getting into big trips, right? So I did this 160 mile loop and I was wearing those big Vask boots. You've probably seen them a dozen different times. They're big and heavy and clunky. And I had blisters on my feet so bad that by the time I finished, I could hear them sloshing and I couldn't even put my boot on my right foot as a result. Now, here's the key is it's not just switching over to trail runners, but it's trail runners with trekking poles. And the reason I say that is I don't have great ankles because I used to be, as the name Snack Box would imply, chunky champ, right? So I was a big dude and I have ankle problems. So I wanted to make sure I didn't sprain my ankle. So basically using trail runners with trekking poles makes a huge difference. And it's also, it allows me to shrink the size of socks so I can constantly put on all fresh socks, like I mentioned, and still have the same volume of socks in there as well. It's also just, they're so much lighter. So if you think about the weight your knee is swinging, when you have a pair of trail runners on, you're going to have a lot less wear on your knees. Again, I'm not that type of doctor, but I can tell you that if you can do it safely to switch to trail runners, there's no way I would go back. There's just no way, given the blister issues that I had, the knee pain that came with it. And I wasn't really doing anything that required big, heavy, lunky boots. Let me actually show you a little bit of what I'm talking about here. It's a great question, Rob. I hope you're okay with me talking about your question so much here. Take a look at the trail in front of us here, and you'll notice that there's not really a need for boots. So just take a peek at this one and see what you think. This is, again, I think I might have shown you already. This is segment 20. Actually, let me show you Georgia Pass because this is the first time you get above tree line. But take a look at the path. This is getting up toward, I think tree line in Colorado is somewhere in the ballpark of like 11,700 feet, give or take. So this goes above that. But notice So when you see that, there's not really a need for heavy, clunky boots because you're gonna have plenty of traction there. Hold on, Rob. 18. That is terrific. Let's pause for a minute and just appreciate a couple of things about the Colorado Trail. Number one is this is a terrific trail for all different ages, right? So all different folks from different ages you'll meet out there. You have different people from different walks of life. I believe I've heard that it's the number one most frequently hiked trail by solo women hikers, which is really interesting number as well, given the history of it being founded by a woman as well. A lot of different things. Rob, that's terrific. I'm super excited for you, and I would point you in the direction of Cam Appel. I believe it's Cam CAM, and then Appel. I believe it's two P's, although I'm not sure. But his YouTube trip, he did a great set of videos. He was only 17 when he through hiked it solo. He does beautiful videos of the trail. I would recommend checking that one out. Super excited that you're here, and please do let me know if there's anything I can do to help as you plan this. That is terrific. I'm really excited for you getting out there like that. Let me see if I can take down this banner here. Any last questions, friends, as we get close to wrapping this up? I'm happy to keep talking, by the way. I will 100% talk your ears off as long as you will let me. But it is getting late, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time here. Any last questions? Drop them in the chat. I'll give you about maybe 30 seconds, and otherwise we'll go ahead and wrap this up, and I'll wish you all well. I do want to point out a couple of sort of last minute kind of reminders, or maybe a couple of last tips as we kind of get to this. I would recommend that everybody plan on stopping in Breckenridge or Frisco. That's 104 miles in. I would also recommend everybody thinking about, if you're going to send a resupply at all, I would think about sending it to either Mullis Pass or to the Twin Lakes General Store. But the rest of the trail towns have plenty of resources available for you by way of grocery stores, specifically if you don't have a dietary restriction. Now, if you have dietary restrictions, by all means, you're going to have to send those ahead. But if you don't, those two places are going to be the key for you to send those in. Last thing that I'll say is be sure you check out the showers in downtown Buena Vista, and know that it's pronounced Buena Vista, that if you get there and you say Buena Vista, they will know you are not from around there, and you will not get the good pancakes at Jan's. You will get some imposter pancakes as well. I think that about covers it. If you have not already, I would encourage you to consider donating to the Colorado Trail Foundation so they can continue taking care of this great trail. I'm grateful for all of you, every single one of you being here. If you've not already, feel free to send me a message at Backcountry Champion on Instagram. Let me know if I can answer any questions for you. And if you've not gotten a sticker yet from me, send me a message. Just give me your address and let me know where I can send you a thank you card for tuning in with a sticker from the YouTube channel, and I'll be happy to do that. Thank you all again. I'm grateful for you. It's great to see you, Huck. Thanks for stopping in. Ruth, Rose, Jody, Tim, the Phoenix, Veronica, all of you. Hashtag. I'm so grateful for you. This one, Jerry, this is the perfect one to send us out with here. Your first beer is free when you finish the trail and go to Carver Brewery in Durango. So definitely go do that. Take care, everybody. Again, so grateful for you. Have a great night. Take care, Daryl and Rob and Scott and everybody else. I'll see you all in the next one.